This is the final day of the 2022 AIGA Design and Business Conference. Thank you for joining us for this fireside and for the conference. Before we begin our fireside chat, a few quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and will be available for viewing post-event. We're also live streaming to our followers on LinkedIn. Please remember that all AIGA events follow our code of conduct. Please connect with us and share your thoughts. The hashtags for this event are AIGA Design and AIGA DBCONF. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome Bennie F. Johnson, AIGA's Executive Director, and today's guest, Lynda Decker, President and Creative Director of Decker Design. Bennie?
Excellent. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our third and final fireside chat for this year's AIGA Design and Business Conference. You know, over the past few days, we've been exploring this intersection, that space between design and business, business and design, and the design of business. You know, all of the areas in which we see growth and an opportunity for you as design professionals, business leaders, agency and studio owners, and those involved in the growth of our contemporary design practice to see the power of these connections for building a better workplace, better solutions, and better futures. Today, I am really delighted to bring a fellow business owner to our table, to bring the one and only Lynda Decker, President and Creative Director of Decker Designs. It was 26 years ago now that you started on this journey to become your own business owner. And I could go into deeper bio, but I'd rather have us just jump into the conversation, Lynda, because that's a great way to start.
Yeah.
26 years ago,
yeah,
you decided that something was going to be different.
I did.
And
I was a malcontent employee. So
all right. Talk about it. I've been that employee too. So just, you're in a good space.
Well, you know, I was working, I've worked in ad agencies and I've worked for design firms. And I was always observing how they ran their business because I always wanted my own business.
Right.
And in my last position, I was a particularly malcontent. The firm was not run very well. And I had a very good friend in Chicago who had been running his own business for a number of years. And in the snowstorm of 1996, it was called the storm of the century.
Right.
We had dinner in the middle of a blizzard, and he basically told me that he was absolutely sick of hearing me complain about my job, and I better make plans to start my own business because if he could do it, I could do it too, which is not really true, but
but the motivation that you needed, right?
Exactly. And then on top of it, which was wonderful, was that he offered to mentor me in that journey and help me anytime I needed help. And
Wow.
And that is, it's a shout out to Steve Liska in Chicago. And Steve has always been there every single time that something happened and I would call him and say, I don't know how to deal with this. And he helped me through a lot of those early days with lots of advice.
What were the things that shocked you those first couple of months when you came into starting your own business?
You know, it was mostly human behavior. I think that was the hardest thing. It was sometimes whether it was employees, at that point I was hiring interns. And then I'd always be shocked, someone would work with me for a few months. And, this is not to say I was not a very well-trained manager. I was relatively early in my career. And people would suddenly leave or they just wouldn't show up. Or a client would make a mistake. So when I started my business, that was, print was really the thing. Right. And you would send a job to a printer and, things were thousands and tens of thousands of dollars for printing. And the client would have made a mistake. They'd call me up screaming and they'd want me to pay for fixing it.
Right.
And it was horrifying because I certainly was in no position. And, where it's you're working for someone from Citigroup and you're just I'm Lynda Decker, you're Citigroup. Like, why are you loading this on me? And it's your mistake, And so those were some of the things that really shocked me was the need to have contracts and to be able to where you had agreements ahead of time. Like I always had thought people would be good people, and they're not always. Sometimes they are.
Sometimes they aren't. But one of the things we know is that, as you mentioned, one of our most downloaded resources of AIGA are the contracts.
Yeah.
And, contracts give people who intend to be good a roadmap on how to behave, right? And that's when we think about it. We've all had those business conversations where there are good people on either side, but there's kind of a misunderstanding of where we need to be. Mm-hmm. And you're right. We just take a step back. If you're a major corporation and you're the one solopreneur, eating the cost of printing is a life or death conversation for you as a small business. Right.
And that was, trying to get paid and sometimes people holding up payment. Those were really difficult situations where, when you're, at the time when you start and you're, as you said, a solopreneur and you're hoping to bring people on, as you start to take those steps to bring other people onto your team, then you realize like you're responsible for somebody else's life. And then some client is holding up payment for I remember somebody holding up a payment for stock photos, and I don't even remember what the issue was that he had, but I remember having to have a really long conversation with this man in order to get him to pay his bill. And then finally he agreed to, and I got a check the next day. But it was, some of the times it was harrowing.
Right. Yeah. So when did you have that moment that you looked around and realized you were running a business? When did it really sink in?
Maybe on April 13th, when you and I had the conversation that you wanted me to participate in this fireside chat.
It's awesome. That's exactly why we wanted you to be a part of this fireside chat. So you've been, running your design shop and you do incredible work that impacts top-notch companies and organizations. And you've been doing it for 26 years.
Yeah. Which
is, no small feat for a small business. And it's, one of the reasons I was excited to talk to you as well about your just attitude and energy and resilience in managing this business for that time period. How have you seen your role as an independent creative shop transform over the last 20 years?
Oh gosh, it has transformed tremendously. When I started the business, as I had said to you just before, it was very print-based. And there were a lot, and at that time in the late 90s, although, the internet was starting to be a thing, it was nowhere, websites were nowhere what they are now. And, there was so much work. There were so many print projects, and I built my client base by picking up the phone and literally cold calling people. And that was a time where people did actually answer
the phone. And you built a business around that. Wow.
Yeah. And I can't tell you how much I had to steel myself for that, because sometimes some people would be horrible and really rude. And other times people would be like, yeah, I need somebody. Why don't you come on in? Like there was just so much work that people needed designers to do that work. And the projects were not necessarily all that big. And so they didn't feel like they were risking their careers. Now, so many projects, especially the ones that we do, are fairly substantial, and they can go on for, a year and a half or two. And, and people are really nervous when they're making that decision because they have their career is on the line. When I started, it was just sort of like, oh, can you do this for sure? I'd be like, sure, I can do that.
So in that space, how do you strengthen your role as a credible resource? I think if you're coming in and the person on the other side, this matters more than more, right? This is their career space in there. How do you kind of still them to you're a credible resource?
Well, I think, that goes to something that you were speaking with Katrina about the other day,
Mhm.
on Wednesday, and she was talking about how designers over-index on craft.
Right.
And, what we were saying earlier, and I said to you, it's a conversation that is sort of yes and.
Right.
Over-indexing on craft is wonderful when you are just starting your career, because that gives you a runway. It gives you an entree into, say, a firm like mine, or say like a firm like Michael's, at Pentagram. Every single young designer has indexed very highly on craft at Pentagram. But over indexing on craft eventually holds you back. And so really, in terms of my journey, I had to learn, and really educate myself on the other aspects of business over time, because
Right.
otherwise I was not credible. And then the other issue that, we should probably touch upon is gender and the role of women in business, because the rules are a bit different for women
Right.
in all of this and in terms of building trust. So getting back to, over time, I really started reading, in terms of business, I'm really self-educated. I've, read a lot of different business books. If there is, a seminar, I'll participate in it. Even if it's a topic that I think I already know very well, I'll just see if there's something else, that I can learn from it. So I'm always curious and always open to learning. And then also, back in 2012, I went back to school. I went to School of Visual Arts to get a master's in design criticism, because I felt that I needed to improve my critical thinking and writing skills.
Okay.
So I was just like, I was probably at the time like one of the oldest students in the program, but it was, running a business and doing a full-time master's program was insane. I will just say that right now.
Right. But in the land of the sane,
Yeah.
save one, that's right. So when we think about that, but this is this commitment in reinvestment in yourself.
Yeah.
If people can see that even if you're running a business enterprise, there's still opportunity for that growth in the space in there.
And you have to, because if you look at the way the design industry has changed since the late 90s, we started out as a heavily print-based, and now where we are is very, heavily digital and on digital brands. And, I think branding has never been as big as it is right now. If I think back to, when I started my career in the design industry, or even back to when, in the 90s, there were these giant binders that were created, and there were only a few firms, and it was called corporate identity. It wasn't even called branding. And if you were talking about a brand, that was something more that like Procter and Gamble was doing, or the ad
We were
agencies.
talking about it. That
Yeah.
was my entry into brand. It was Procter and Gamble.
Yeah.
And creating the brand and the brand management program there for me, thinking about that. But today, when we talk about brand, it's almost ubiquitous. It's everywhere. But
Yeah.
yet our understanding of what a brand is today, what the responsibility in the business, I think has less clarity for people to come in. So when you have clients that reach out to you, do they really understand the extent of your capabilities? Do you find that they understand what they're looking for and what you can help them with? Or is it still more of a coaching and learning?
I'd say it's a bit of each. There is some coaching and learning. I mean, we decided about 5 years ago to really focus our work in 2 areas, and that's primarily financial services, which is where, I just have had so much experience in that area. And then also law firms, and which is something we fell into sort of accidentally. And then I found out that I really like working with lawyers. And that's probably a whole other
Will you say that again? Will you say that again so we can have that for the record?
I really like working for lawyers. They're smart. They are, for the most part, willing to listen and to acknowledge that they have their expertise and that somebody else has expertise in brand and marketing, and they are looking for guidance, and they're very open, and it's just really fun. And because often that, you're working with partners, they are decision makers.
Right.
And so it's really, I find it's something that's quite magical for me. But anyway, what we started doing and using my design criticism degree is we started writing. And so we publish probably at least 2 articles a month on our website that are really targeted to the issues that either a financial services company or a law firm may be grappling with. And so oftentimes now, because of that focus, that when people contact us, they're contacting us specifically for that expertise. Right. So they may not understand how the sausage gets made, but they see that we've worked with maybe their competitors. So,
and it's allowed you to arise as a thought leader in a very focused area.
Yeah. And when you really start to dive into a particular industry and you start to understand the issues that they have, it just becomes more, I find it becomes more and more interesting, because you encounter something new, and then that because of your experience, how to deal with it. And that expertise just keeps growing all the time.
So what's wonderful about your viewpoint in here is if I can just interject these words, you've curated not only your practice, but then your portfolio of clients as well.
Yeah.
And you've taken the time to grow, in which the resources and skills that you offer match nicely with the group. So we're looking at it, at the more mature space in here. I love to talk about the messy part at the beginning of that.
Oh, yeah.
So give us some guidance on how have you had times when you've had to gently let down a client or fire your clients in a space because it's not a good fit? No one ever wants to talk about that part of it where it may not be a good fit for what you're doing for them.
Yeah. It has not happened that often, but it has certainly happened. And there was one time early, when the first maybe 2 years of my firm, and I had done a project for an architect, and it was really the whole thing it came out great. Everything was wonderful. He was really happy. And then we were doing more and more projects for this particular architect. And then at one point, his assistant had taken over a lot of the interactions with my firm, and she was really mean. And then at one point, she made one of my designers cry. And this was a young man. I mean, so it wasn't like, where you'd say, oh, was, a fragile girl or something like that. I mean, it was a, tough kid. And so anyway, I had to call him and just say, I'm really sorry. This person is she's been so abusive. And then finally today she made, my designer cry. We can't keep doing this. And, and I had spoken to her a few times where I was like, look, you really need to, when you interact with us, it needs to be in a different way. And she just didn't care. And I said, we just can't work with you anymore. And he was just sort of like, well, what do you mean? And I said, we can't work with you. And he was pretty flabbergasted. And then there was another time where I had a client who he did some terrible things. Like he had decided that he had lowered the bill of an estimate he had signed. And then he just had decided he was going to renegotiate the bill with me after the fact. And I said, but you approved this cost before we did the work. And then that was another client that I said, I'm really sorry. You know what? We can't work with you again.
Now, on the flip side of that, are there clients that you've actively sought out and said, I think that Decker would be a good fit for what they need in the marketplace?
Well, we're always actively looking. There was, so for a period of time, we did work for a nonprofit in the city called the Waterfront Alliance.
Okay.
And I knew the then director, I knew pretty well from his other work that he had done at Habitat for Humanity in New York. And I had just finished my design criticism program. And part of my research when I was in that program was Hurricane Sandy had happened to New York. And I was really interested in exploring urban resiliency, particularly as a social justice issue. And so they needed a new brand and website and all sorts of things, and had an extremely limited budget. And I went to Roland and I had said to him, you know what, there is no designer who is going to be more passionate about this project than I am. And you should, you should work with us on this. And we had, for the time that Roland was still the director of that organization, we had a fantastic relationship.
Oh, wow. So elevate your difference. So how hard is it to come up with your own branding for your own space?
It's really hard.
I know. I love to ask that question of designers and entrepreneurs in other spaces, especially when we do this work for other people. The hardest client ever.
It's brutal. It's just brutal. So in the interest of, or I'm continually researching ways to educate myself. There's a really terrific online business resource. It's called Section 4, and it was founded by Scott Galloway, who is an NYU professor. And I highly recommend his podcast, and he does a great podcast with Kara Swisher. So he has all of these educational sprints, and I recently took a storytelling sprint.
Okay.
And I wanted to do, because I was thinking, okay, I need to come up with what is the Decker design story? And I could not do it. It was just, I finished the project, but it was terrible. But I met a writer who is in my group, and I said to her, okay, I need some help. How, can I hire you to help me? And I think that at a certain point that you need to understand that there are certain skills that you don't have, and that maybe you need to seek out a professional to help bring it to the next level.
And it's fun. I also find that you learn even more about what your clients experience when you have to put yourself through that, and having that objective third-party partner is really great in that space. But yeah, so you classically though defined yourself as a strategy-driven design agency.
Yes.
I love that, because you're putting it up front and center, that this is about strategy and design. When you work with your clients, how are you able to reinforce the part that it is the critical thinking and planning that enforces the design work as well?
Well, that comes through in the first phone call that I have with people, and where they'll say, oh, we really love your work. We love, like they'll always say, oh, we love how such and such looks. Right. And I'll say, that is fantastic. I'm really glad that you love how it looks. But let me explain to you how it got there. And that this, a few years ago, maybe 10, 15, maybe 15 years ago, we were more apt to allow a client to say, well, I don't want to pay for that. And now it's just, I think it's like the confidence that you develop over time, where you say to somebody, you don't get C without A. You have to go to A, B, and C. Right. You have to follow the process. If we take one part of the process out, the project will fail. And so this is what it is. And this is what, and I'm also really upfront now with people about fees, where I'll just say, you know what, the work that we do tends to range from X to Y. Let me know if that, are you comfortable? Like, does that work with your budget? Right. Because sometimes people will contact us, and, I never want to assume something, but you kind of have a feeling that they probably are not at a point where they can invest a certain amount. with us. And we've just found that if we try to do something at a lower price, the quality, like we just can't pull it off. We end up losing money on it because we don't want the quality to suffer. And then we end up putting more time on the job. And it's like, well, we're not a nonprofit. So, we're not here to, service, these people, these smaller companies that they just don't have the budget allocated that they can do it.
So when we think about this in kind of the role of moving from being the designer to being the kind of senior designer in a burgeoning enterprise to being the head of your design firm, where do you now find inspiration for the work every day? What inspires you getting up every day?
I think it's just inspiration is everywhere. It's really wonderful that the museums have opened up again in New York.
Yes.
So that is, that's tremendously wonderful for visual, just to see things that are different from the everyday. But I also love watching people on the street. I mean, that to me is just fantastic. Our office is at 5th Avenue and 23rd Street. So we're right by Madison Square Park. And it's such an intersection of humanity where, you get people who are going to like the Lego store or Harry Potter. You get people who live in the neighborhood or just out walking their dogs. You get people who are going to offices, and the people watching is just fantastic. So that's one thing that is really wonderful about New York. I read a lot. I listen to podcasts. I am a news junkie, and so I try to find inspiration through many different channels.
Well, it's interesting. So first of all, you had me at Lego store. So yes, that is one of my favorite spaces. But it's interesting, for those who are watching and listening, I want to full disclosure, that's the base in New York City proper, but we're having our conversation today from outside of the city, correct?
Correct, yes.
So how have you been able to balance the kind of environment of the office in the city and then a remote space as both kind of creative inputs?
Well, I think our team miraculously when we had to go to remote in March of 2020, we started out we experimented with how many times a day we were going to interact with each other. And then we found that the best combination when we were all remote was to have a 15-minute meeting in the morning and another 15-minute at the end of the day. So we sort of wrap things up. And a lot of times those meetings are more like people talking about, maybe something in the news, or, it's really more about us interacting as human beings, as opposed to there's some project management stuff in there, but for the most part, it's about connecting with your colleagues. So when we decided to go back to the office in March of this year, we had tried last fall. And then when I think it was just right after Thanksgiving, we went back to remote from December till about early March.
Right.
And then we're back in the office. And so we're Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in the New York office. And that's when we have most of our really collaboration, when we know we have sort of problems that we have to solve together. And then where we can gather in our conference room and, just put stuff up on the walls and do all the kind of stuff that, people have been doing for decades together. And then we try to sort of hold Thursday and Friday for those days that for people to do more deep work, so that we feel like if we're remote, then, it's, each person is probably quieter. They can really concentrate that way. But the office is always available to anybody. So if somebody says, I'm going to go to the office on Thursday, it's totally fine. It's there. And, everybody has access to it and the equipment that's there.
Where, thinking about your business today and as you were building and designing it, what's one thing you wish you had known when you started? So not day one. I'll give you some space, maybe year 5. What's one thing you wish you had known as a as a studio owner?
I wish I had really understood the concept of that when you are the leader of the business, you can't physically do projects, because even though like probably at year 5, I would still work on specific projects. And I think it compromised my ability to be a good objective leader. And it probably compromised our ability to grow as well. And I wish I had really understood that I shouldn't be physically designing things at that point, that it was time to sort of step back, hire people who were fantastic,
Right.
and then guide and coach and guide them to learn that, the role of a great leader is really more of being like a coach, and to help people grow in their roles so that they can sort of see the next level for themselves,
Right.
because as we were talking, it's like craft, like when you go to work in a small firm, it is an opportunity to accelerate your career in a certain sense, because in a small place, you kind of have to do everything. And there's a good chance you may end up getting assigned a project that is so big that you might not get that in a bigger firm, because it would go to someone more senior. So in a small firm, that's the opportunity. And then, if your boss is a good coach and helps you to see like, oh, I'm now at a stage in my career where I'm going to direct the intern, maybe I'm going to learn how to supervise another person. I'm going to learn how to teach skills to another individual. And then, and help people to move along that pathway so that they can be leaders. I wish I knew that 5 years in.
And to put a different focus on those questions in there, what advice do you give to other young women who are looking to take on these leadership roles?
Oh, I touched on this earlier, and being a woman in business, I think there are challenges that men do not have to deal with.
Mhm.
And I think trust and competency, like having people believe in your competency, is it's so much more challenging. I was listening to Adam Grant the other day, who had a podcast, and he was talking about pitches. And so he had a young woman on the podcast who had a tech company, and he was coaching her about her pitch. And one of the issues that they brought up, and I was sitting there, I was like, oh God, I can't believe I'm hearing this, was that, for a woman who is in, say, a new business pitch, or, pitching to investors, if she smiles a lot and she's warm and friendly, she's interpreted as having less competence.
Wow.
And, and like, I can't tell you how many times that someone will say to me, you're too serious, you should smile more. And then you go into a meeting and, it's like you should, and apparently like you shouldn't be super enthusiastic, because that makes people think that you are, that you don't know what you're doing. Where for a man, he needs to smile and be enthusiastic. And that's like, he's warm and friendly. I mean, the contradictions are crazy.
Right.
And how it's like, oh, if you're tough, you're a bitch, if you're nice, people can walk all over you. I mean, it's just like, it is so difficult for women. And I don't know if any of us really have the answer to that, but I think it's just like, it's something to be aware of. Like, you just need to acknowledge that a lot of times things are going to be more difficult. Now, that said, many of my clients now are women. And when I started my business, it was
I was going to ask you about that in terms of the arc, and especially the focus on, financial services and legal services areas in there. Have you seen a rise and change in leadership in the space for your clients? So
yeah.
Are you working with more women as leaders?
More women as leaders. And I can't tell you how many times where we'll have a conversation and it'll be a new business conversation. And then it will come out that some guy mansplained them and how mad they are that like some, from some agency, he's just going to come in and tell them everything. And they're just outraged by the attitude. And I'm like, yeah, I know, I've been there. And so so in a certain sense, there is what did not exist previously. There, I think there's more camaraderie. And I think that often women, and I don't want to make this as a blanket assumption, but I do think that sometimes there's empathy for the situation that we are all faced with.
So when I think about all the skills that you bring to the table as a designer, and now those as an executive leader, do you find that some of your training as a designer helps you navigate and strengthen these connections with your clients and spaces? As I kind of hear you listening through there about listening and engaging, and some of the things we talked about as kind of core training as a designer, have you been able to pull those skills in to navigating these executive orders?
Yeah, I think designers by nature have I am very good at pattern recognition, and I think that designers have that skill gets developed early on. And so that does help me with when I'm working with clients, especially in the early stages where we're developing strategy, where I will hear the same statements, and I'm really sensitive to that, to hearing the same things repeated over and over. I've always been the kind of person that you could put this big messy thing in front of me, and then I can go, oh, here's what it's supposed to be, and rearrange all the parts. I used to, when I was a kid, I used to put bicycles together. So I wanted a 10-speed. Okay. Side note.
Let's delve into this now.
I wanted a 10-speed bike when I was
about this bicycle building. We have never talked about this. Okay,
bicycle building. When I was in 8th grade, I wanted a 10-speed bike, and my father said no. But I had graduated from parochial school, and some of my relatives gave me some money. And so I talked my mother into taking me to one of the local stores, and it was this place called the Times Square store. So it was a cheap place. And when you got the bike, it came in a box. It wasn't assembled. And all of the directions were in maybe Japanese or Korean. I don't know, but there were no directions in English or anything.
Did you have pictures?
No. Okay. So I had to put all of I was so determined, because my father was like, I said no, and you defied me. And I was like, well, that's kind of what I do. And so I had all the parts in the backyard. And then very gradually, I figured out how everything went together. And I put the damn bike together, and I just with one pair of pliers, because I didn't have any other tools that I could find around the house. And I did it. I put the bike together.
And you know what's wonderful? That story is just such a metaphor for you and what you built with Decker Design. You came in, you started off from being the unhappy employee, outside of the company in there, and taking all the parts and pieces with no directions, but you knew you wanted a bike.
Right.
And you continue to refine and build this in. And now you've built this magnificent bike. And I have to say it, I tell you all the time, I'm incredibly proud of the journey you continue to take, and the work that you do is an example for those in our community to see that it is possible. I cannot believe you built a bike with cheap parts and pieces, but it is so much you and the story in there. And so I want to give you a moment to get the last word in on, what do you think about our messy future? I know you like to make things better that are messy. What do you think the role of design and design businesses can be in terms of making a better future?
Oh gosh, I guess really what we're seeing going on in our society right now, there's so many different ways that design can contribute. I think in particular, healthcare is a huge information in healthcare, I think, is a huge, huge place. Before we got on the call, you and I were talking about, when we had our last conversation, I had said to you that I wasn't feeling well the day that we had talked, and I got COVID. My husband got COVID. And even though we were both vaccinated, he got very sick. And we went on a journey to find out what to do and to get Paxlovid for him. And it was so difficult, just like finding out basic information in terms of healthcare. Now I'm out in Montauk right now, and here in the East End of Long Island in the winter, there's really a dearth of healthcare services. So, we called around, we called to the local hospital. They were like, I don't even know what that is. And so anyway, we went on this incredible journey to try and figure out how we could get him this medication. We eventually got it, but it was an entire 8-hour day of research and driving to try and find it. And, healthcare, I mean, when you think about, like, we're middle-class people, like, it shouldn't be that hard. How bad is it for somebody who has many more economic challenges?
Right.
I mean, it's just unconscionable. So I think, if I were going to pick one place, I would really want to reform and centralize all the information about healthcare and how to get services into places and to people who can't get it. Because I think it's just a national tragedy.
And I think on that note, we'll end our fireside today with strategist, business owner, bicycle maker, futurist, designer turned CEO, which you were probably already a CEO before. Thank you, Lynda, for being here. Thank you for sharing in such a passionate and candid way your journey through design and business. And I also have to point out, Lynda promised me that she would have the coolest fireside background for me ever. So if you notice, there are 3 incredibly groovy lava lamps, which are my digital fireside for today. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Lynda, for being here. And everyone, enjoy the rest of our Design and Business Conference. Continue to create boldly. Thank you.